The training ground buzzed with the sound of youthful bravado. A group of fresh recruits, their exoskeletons gleaming under the twin suns, lounged lazily around a holographic table displaying a rotating model of Earth. They wore the insignia of the Vorka, an alien species renowned for their advanced technology and cold, calculating demeanor. But at this moment, calculation was the furthest thing from their minds. Humans, scoffed Korik, his mandibles clicking with amusement. I still can't believe they're even considered a threat. Small, fragile things, clinging to an ancient rock full of primitive technology. It's almost embarrassing. His fellow recruits snickered, their voices buzzing in agreement. The idea of humans with their fleshy bodies and relatively simple weapons had become a running joke in the camp. Another recruit, Vecker, leaned forward, eager to contribute to the mockery. I heard they wear cloth to protect themselves from the weather. Imagine that. As if fabric could stand up to a plasma blast. I could take down 10 of them with my eyes closed. The holographic Earth rotated silently in the center of their circle, casting pale blue light on their faces. They had heard stories of the human resistance, of Earth's resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. But none of them took it seriously. The Vorka had seen countless planets fall, civilizations crumble beneath their superior weapons and intellect. Why should Earth be any different? Korik continued, his voice rising with the confidence of a youth who had never seen real battle. They think bravery is a substitute for strength. It's pathetic. I've read the reports. Humans are impulsive, emotional. They don't think things through. They charge into battle because they don't know any better. Their laughter echoed across the metallic walls of the training hall. It was the laughter of those who had yet to experience the horrors of war firsthand, of soldiers who believed themselves invincible. That's when the door to the hall slid open with a quiet hiss. Silence fell immediately. The figure that entered commanded it without saying a word. Tall, imposing, with scars running down his battle-worn exoskeleton, veteran officer Khazar moved with a deliberate weight, his presence an unspoken reminder of battles fought and survived. His compound eyes, duller now with age but still sharp with experience, surveyed the group of young soldiers as though assessing their worth in a single glance. Korik, whose arrogance had been the loudest moments ago, shifted uncomfortably. He stood straighter, his bravado quickly retreating under the cold, assessing gaze of the veteran. The other recruits followed suit, their previous mockery now feeling misplaced. Khazar moved slowly to the holographic display, his gaze locking on the image of Earth. He stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his presence pressing down on the recruits. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but carried the weight of 100 battles. You find humans amusing, do you? No one dared respond immediately. Korik, though visibly unnerved, managed a weak attempt to recover his confidence. They're not exactly impressive, sir. The veteran's mandibles clicked together, a sound that could have been mistaken for laughter, though none of the recruits dared to assume as much. Khazar's eyes never left the image of Earth, its swirling blue and green surface spinning in mock serenity. Impressive, he echoed softly, his tone unreadable. No, not impressive. Not by the standards of what you see before you. He gestured toward the advanced weaponry lined against the walls of the training hall. The plasma rifles, force shields, and mechanized armor, each a symbol of the Vorka's superiority. But humans, he continued, turning his gaze back to the recruits, are not to be underestimated. You see their world, and you laugh. You hear their bravery, and you mock it. And yet, Khazar's mandibles twitched slightly, a hint of something that might have been emotion, though it was quickly suppressed. I've seen bravery from them that would shame many of our own. The recruits stood frozen, uncertain how to respond. This wasn't the story they had expected. They fight, Khazar said, his voice harder now, because they know death is coming for them. They don't have our technology or our physical advantages, but they do have something you have yet to understand. He turned sharply to face them fully. Desperation, the will to survive, and that is more dangerous than any weapon. For the first time since they had begun their mocking, the recruits felt something shift inside them. It was as though the ground beneath their feet had grown unstable. The image of Earth, once a source of laughter, now seemed heavier, its peaceful surface hiding something far more formidable beneath. Khazar stepped away from the display, leaving the young soldiers in stunned silence. "If you ever find yourself facing a human in battle," he said as he reached the door, "pray that you are not the one who underestimates them. It may be the last mistake you make." With that, he exited, the door hissing shut behind him, leaving the recruits standing in the cold, metallic hall. Their laughter had long since faded, replaced by the uneasy weight of realization. Korik's mind raced, still processing the veteran's words as the group stood in uneasy silence. None of them had expected the shift in tone. The humans had been a joke, an inferior race, easy prey for the mighty Vorka. But now, Khazar's cryptic warning lingered in the air, heavier than the battle gear they trained with. Finally, Vekker spoke, breaking the tension. "How could they be dangerous? They have nothing." Khazar's voice, as if summoned by the question, echoed from the entrance as he returned. He looked directly at Vekker, eyes narrowing with quiet intensity. "Nothing?" he said softly. "You believe that, do you? Let me tell you what I saw. Then you tell me if humans have nothing." The recruits, now subdued, gathered closer as Khazar began his story. His voice carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom, each word precise and unadorned. "I was stationed on a planet not unlike this one, a strategic outpost, valuable for its resources but otherwise insignificant. We had orders to suppress any resistance, minimal as we expected it to be. A small contingent of human forces had landed nearby, a last-ditch effort to defend their territory. We thought it would be over within hours." Khazar's mandibles twitched slightly, as if remembering the intensity of the battle. But the humans fought back, not with superior weapons or numbers. They had neither. No, they fought with something far more dangerous, an unwavering will. The recruits exchanged uncertain glances, the arrogance they'd carried earlier now crumbling. Khazar continued, his voice steady, drawing them into the story. "Their weapons were primitive by our standards, ballistic projectiles, explosives. They didn't have plasma or energy shields. But they didn't need them. They used the environment, turned the terrain to their advantage. Ambushes, traps, things we hadn't anticipated." Khazar's gaze shifted to Korik, who swallowed nervously under the intensity of the veteran's stare. "There was a moment, in the midst of battle, where I saw what bravery truly meant to them. A human soldier, a captain, I believe, held his ground as we advanced. His squad had been wiped out. He was alone, wounded. By all logic, he should have fled, but he didn't." The silence in the room deepened, every recruit hanging on Khazar's words. "He stood in front of our fire, knowing he would die, but he bought time for the rest of his people to retreat. He fought like death meant nothing to him, like victory was a mere footnote to what he was truly fighting for." Korik opened his mouth to ask something, but the veteran wasn't finished. "And then there's their kindness," Khazar added, his voice softening, almost as if the memory was still difficult to comprehend. "After the fighting, when the humans had retreated and we surveyed the battlefield, we found something strange. Human medics, those who survived, had stayed behind, not just to tend to their wounded, but ours." The recruits blinked in confusion. Vekker furrowed his brow. "They helped us." Khazar nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "They could have fled. They could have left our wounded to die, but they didn't. Their medics worked tirelessly, moving through the wreckage, tending to our soldiers as if they were their own. I saw one of them give water to a Vorka trooper, though they were the enemy only minutes before. It wasn't an act of strategy. It was pure, unthinking kindness." The room was deathly silent. The recruits, who had so casually mocked the idea of human bravery, were now grappling with something they couldn't quite understand. Khazar's words had stripped away their overconfidence, leaving only the cold reality of what it meant to face humans. "Don't mistake that kindness for weakness," Khazar warned, his voice hardening again. Because when the battle resumed, those same medics picked up weapons. They were not soldiers, but they fought. They fought with everything they had. And it wasn't desperation that fueled them. It was something deeper. He paused, as if searching for the right words to describe what he had seen. It was their will to protect, not just themselves, but each other. Their ferocity comes from the bonds they share, their refusal to let one another fall, no matter the cost. When you fight a human, you're not just fighting an individual. You're fighting the entire pack. The recruits stood frozen, their minds struggling to reconcile the image they'd painted of humans with the one Khazar had described. The idea of fighting beings who would lay down their lives not for victory, but for each other, was something none of them had considered. And that, Khazar finished, is why you must never underestimate them. Humans are not bound by fear of death the way we are. They fight for something greater than survival, and that makes them dangerous in ways you can't even imagine. The veteran's words lingered, heavy and final. The recruits no longer questioned the danger humans posed. They now understood, though not fully, why Khazar had interrupted their mockery. With a final glance at the image of Earth, Khazar left the hall, his steps slow and deliberate. The young aliens remained behind, their laughter now a distant memory, replaced by the cold realization that they had been wrong. The gravity of what lay ahead pressed down on them, and for the first time, they wondered if they were truly prepared for the war they so eagerly anticipated. Korik's mind whirled as he watched the veteran leave, his arrogance shattered. The stories of human bravery and kindness had upended everything he thought he knew, but something still gnawed at him. He couldn't reconcile the image of primitive, fragile humans with the idea of true threat. Their bravery might be admirable, even terrifying, but bravery alone didn't win wars. He turned to Vekker, who seemed equally troubled. "They're resourceful, sure," Korik murmured, "but it's still just Earth, a planet of simple animals and unpredictable weather. How can they hold their ground against a superior species like us?" Vekker didn't answer, but their silent exchange was interrupted by another voice. "Because Earth itself makes them dangerous." Khazar had returned, standing silently in the doorway. His gaze swept across the recruits, the shadows of a harsh truth visible in his eyes. He moved back to the holographic display of Earth, and with a few quick gestures, zoomed in on its surface. It was no longer just an image of a serene blue-green world. It now displayed towering mountains, deadly oceans, and sprawling forests that looked like labyrinths. "Earth," he began slowly, "is not like our world, or the other worlds you've been trained to fight on. Earth is what's called a Deathworld. To live there means to survive constant threats, not just from predators, but from the planet itself. Earth has forged humans into something tougher than you can imagine." The recruits exchanged confused glances. Korik, emboldened by curiosity, finally asked, "A Deathworld? What does that mean?" Khazar gestured at the hologram. "It means humans are the result of millions of years of evolution in an environment designed to kill them. Earth's oceans are filled with creatures that can tear a human apart in seconds. Its skies produce storms capable of ripping apart entire cities. Earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, freezing cold, blistering heat. Humans have survived all of it, not because they're stronger, but because they adapt." The recruits leaned forward, the gravity of Khazar's words sinking in. They had trained in controlled environments, their advanced technology ensuring their safety during simulations. But humans? They had evolved in chaos, in conditions that could snuff them out at any moment. They were never supposed to survive. Khazar continued. Every natural disaster, every predator should have wiped them out long ago. But they didn't die. They adapted. Earth sharpened them, shaped them into the perfect survivors. What you think is their weakness, being physically frail, is their greatest strength. They don't need to be strong because they've learned how to overcome. That's why, on Earth, nothing ever truly dies. Korik swallowed hard. He hadn't expected this. For the first time, he considered what it must be like to live on such a planet, constantly fighting against the very world you were born into. And yet, humans had endured. They hadn't just survived, they had thrived. And as for their weapons, Khazar said, shifting the display to show a diagram of human firearms, don't be fooled by their simplicity. Yes, they lack our plasma technology or advanced targeting systems, but human weapons are brutally efficient. The recruits stared at the primitive guns, and Korik frowned. But they're so basic. How could they match us? Khazar tapped the hologram, zooming in on a particular human rifle. Basic doesn't mean ineffective. Human weapons are built to kill, plain and simple. Where we use technology to finesse a kill from a distance, they rely on precision and sheer force. Their bullets might seem primitive, but I've seen what happens when they're used right. They don't miss. They don't stop until their enemy is down. He gestured toward the rifle again. This weapon, he said, his voice steady, doesn't rely on energy. It doesn't need a charge pack or recharging station. It works in the middle of a magnetic storm, through mud, rain, and blood. It never fails, because humans can't afford to fail. And that's how they fight. Not to win, but to make sure their enemy loses. The recruits were silent, absorbing the harsh truth behind Khazar's words. The idea of facing a race hardened by a Deathworld, using weapons designed to survive any condition, shook them deeply. They had always believed that technological superiority would guarantee victory, but now they realized they had overlooked a key factor: the sheer tenacity of a species born into adversity. Khazar continued, his voice darker now. In one of my campaigns, we captured a human squad. They were starving, low on supplies, surrounded on all sides. By all logic, they should have surrendered, but they didn't. They used their last bullets to kill 2 of my best soldiers. They attacked with knives, rocks, their bare hands when it came down to it. And even when we overwhelmed them, I saw it in their eyes they weren't beaten. They were planning their next move. Even as they fell, the recruits could no longer deny the truth. Earth had produced more than just an intelligent species. It had created predators, adaptable, relentless predators who wouldn't stop fighting until either they or their enemies were dead. Khazar shut down the holographic display and faced them one last time. Earth is not a joke. Humans are not prey. You laugh now because you don't understand what you'll face when you land on their soil. But when you're in the thick of battle, surrounded by a world that kills without mercy, facing humans who fight as if death doesn't matter, you'll wish you'd listened. The door slid open again as Khazar left, his final words echoing behind him. The young soldiers were left alone with their thoughts, the weight of the veterans' stories pressing down on them. Earth, the Deathworld, had forged something they hadn't been prepared for, and soon they would face it firsthand.